Okay, well, thank you all for coming to our last 5 for 5 of this season. My name is Courtney Cosden. I am a soil health instructor with University of Idaho Extension and USDA NRCS. And with me is Lucille Rollins, who's a soil health specialist with NRCS as my co-host. The way this 5 for 5 works is we have 4 presenters on today, and today is actually, sorry, hold on, letting smart people in. Today the theme is UI extension faculty research. So it's kind of we haven't done an all research 5 for 5 in a while, so this should be fun to hear from everybody, and hopefully I'll have some questions for our speakers. But each speaker will get 5 minutes to present 5 slides or less, all on research that they have done with the University of Idaho or previously. We'll take questions for the speakers right after they present, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. And the order today, so we have Liang with us, Linda Schott, Jemila Chellappa, and Kendall Kahl. And I'll have each of our presenters, would you please introduce yourself again and kind of tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what research you do and how your work, what your work is that you do with University of Idaho before you begin. And I won't hold that against your time, so don't worry. But yeah, I think that is pretty much all the intro things I have to say. These are recorded, so it'll go up on our Soil Health YouTube page in, a week or two once I get it all edited. And I think that's about it before we can get started. Is there anything you want to say, Lucille?
Oh, no. Looking forward to hearing our speakers speak, and thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Cool. Okay, well, if you are ready, you are our first speaker.
That good? Can you see it?
There we go. Yep, looks all good.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, everybody. This is Liang from from Aberdeen Research Extension Center and under University of Idaho. So I am a cropping system agronomist. So my work is on cropping systems and irrigation management and also crop physiology in response to abiotic and biotic stresses. And today I'm going to just briefly introduce our project on Cereal-Pea intercropping systems in organic transition. So as you can see in this slide, so in this project, we have monocropping wheat and monocropping barley and also intercropping with peas at different seeding rates. And this percentage of both species, of the 3 species, they refer to, relative to the monocropping the seeding rate. So basically 75% wheat, that means 75% of monocropping wheat seeding rate. And you can see the look of the plots, they are very different when you have different seeding rates. And this is only mainly for the research purposes because when we have the plants, the wheat and barley, and then just plant with peas, and then we have uniform kind of neighboring crops associated with each other. But for growers, they can mix the seed together and then plant in the field as a mixed intercropping. But we didn't do that because, this way we have uniform seeding rate. For mixed seed, because the seed size, they are different. And sometimes, the seed may segment it, and one side of the plot maybe have more one species and the other side more more of the other species. So in this way, in alternate rows, then we have a more uniform stands across the whole plot. So this is a study for 3 years from 2022 to 2024. And so far we have finished processing the green yield from 2022 and 2023. And this is the yield of barley, monocropping barley and monocropping pea compared with different seeding rates of intercropping barley and pea. As you can see, for the 2022, we found significant differences between drought stress and the well water conditions. So the wild water condition refers to 100% ET or full irrigation, and the drought stress refers to 50% ET or the water availability is very close to the dry land water availability. And then you can see in 2022, so the the water regime, the green yield differ between these 2 water regime. And then for the barley yield, when we compare them, the highest was in monocropping barley, and the monocropping barley yield was greater than 75% P, and then 55% P, and then 50-50 split. So basically, the barley, monocropping barley yield was about the same as 75 barley, 25% P. So when the barley population is high, smaller competition with peas, and then the yield was still the same. And then for 2023, we only saw significant differences between barley and 75 P. So as you can see with, throughout the years, we'll see some differences. And also 2022, that was the first year we had an organic transition. The previous year we had green manure like oat. So the soil fertility was pretty high, and you can see the yield is relatively higher in 2022 compared to 2023 in wheat. But 2023, we had a pretty cool early in the spring, and then the weather was pretty favorable for pea growth. And that's why the pea yield was higher in 2023 compared to 2022. And then when we take a look at the wheat yield, so under drought stress, still we see the highest yield is in monocropping wheat, and then the monocropping wheat was really similar to 75-75, 75-25 this split. And then under well water condition, also the highest yield was in monocropping wheat, and then very similar to 75-25 P intercropping. But interestingly, in 2023, we didn't see any difference either between the water regimes or between any cropping systems. So we can see, under the high nutrient availability in the first year, and then see the cropping system kind of switch when we start to deplete the nutrient. And we'll look forward to see the yield from 2024, and probably when we have higher pea populations, maybe the yield can benefit a little bit more. So in this project, we also evaluated the wheat end-use quality, and this is the data from 2022. So we have a wheat quality lab under our college at Aberdeen Research Center. And in the lab, we can send the grains there and then mill them and get a flour. And the wheat variety we use in this study is a soft white wheat. And then the standard test is the standard baking test is for cookies. So now you can see the results for flour protein, flour yield, and the cookie diameter. We didn't see much difference either between the cropping systems or between with the water regimes. So basically, in the first year, the flour quality was maintained in the first year. It's really consistent with our result. The first year, the soil fertility was pretty good. And then we also evaluated the plant biomass for the nutritive values in 3 years, but we only show the results from the first year. And then these are the nutritive values from the whole plant biomass collected at the maturity stage. And then for all of these, just for pea, this monocropping pea, and then for all the intercropping treatments, we combine the biomass of different species together for the nutritive value analysis. And you can see when we have higher pea, like a monocropping pea, and also wheat intercropping with pea, the protein is higher than the barley cropping systems and then monocropping barley. And then for the NDF, or neutral detergent fiber, is in the opposite direction. So the pea has the lower NDF, and then higher NDF is in feed barley and the barley. So because we had actual plot in the field, so we included feed barley just as actual treatment in the field. So basically for the nutritive value, and they were more affected by cropping system, but not affected by irrigation regime in the first year. And this project was funded by USD and NIFA, the Organic Transition Program, and the other PIs include Dr. Linda Schott, Zach Kegler, and Pat Husenberger. Sorry. Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, She. I love that you all were able to make cookies to look at the And yeah, to look at the diameter and the protein, that's such a fun aspect of the project. We can take questions for she now.
I do have a question for you. So I had seen actually that you were with us I think back in 2022.
Yeah.
And at that time, Sean had asked a question. I think it was Sean about the economic return on intercrop systems. And you had mentioned that there was an organic transition project and data forthcoming on the economic return. Can you talk more about that, or do you have any data on that?
Not really. So
No? Okay.
we do have Pat on this project. He's the ag economist. So later I'll talk to him. Probably he can give us more information, or we can invite him to talk here for like the yield and then the market and then the economics for the organic transition if we have intercropping system like this. But I feel you can see the grain, the crop yield, like a pea and the small grains, they kind of fluctuate between years. And it is a kind of benefit, like for 2023, we had a pretty cool spring and then delay the crop, like a small grain grows. But see that year, pea grows really well. If we have a good pea market, and then it's probably is good for growers have a good economic income, but still, no matter what, growers can still have some, probably better than sometimes probably better than monocropping. Growers can still use the intercropping the product to feed the cattle. It depends on what um, crop type, what variety they use. Like for example, you can replace. This is we use the green pea, but growers can easily replace peas with forage pea, and then wheat with triticale, and barley with feed barley or forage barley, and then just bale them and to feed cattle. So they don't need to worry about, we have really uniform seeding rate. Just need to find a good seeding rate, have a good yield.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for she?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Was the green manure tilled in that first year that you talked about, or was this all no-till?
Yeah, I think so, green manure. So this project started 2022. So the green manure was in 2021 and then tilled it into the field. And then, the field was fallow after that until we started to plant the field in 2022. And then because of the ISDA for the certification, the organic certification. So they suggest, it is not a good idea to have continuous crop every year, even though we have intercropping. They're still kind of debating, should we count it as one crop or one cropping system and then continuously every year? So I think we had cover crops every fall. So 2022, I think we planted winter barley, and then we planted another year winter barley, maybe. I don't quite remember. And then the third time, no, 2022 fall, 2023. Yeah. So the first year was winter barley, and the second year we planted canola. No, sorry, not canola, mustard. Canola is not organic. So mustard. So we got mustard seed and we plant mustard. So one is to break the rotation, and second to control the weeds.
And each one of those cover crops was tilled in when they were.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but the tillage was not really heavy. So here we only do like pretty shallow. We don't even say tillage, probably just disc, like
Mhm.
6 inches. Yeah,
Great.
we should say reduced tillage. Yeah.
Great. That's really interesting.
Any other questions for she? Okay, well, thanks so much, she, for presenting your work on intercropping for us.
Thank you.
Okay, and Linda, if you are ready to go, we can queue you up.
I'm muted. So I am going to present on a project that I was not actually involved with from the data collection standpoint, which is kind of funny, but I'm doing a lot on the data analysis and also trying to continue this project and get additional funding. But it's just really cool data that hasn't been presented on a lot, and so I thought it was a good opportunity. So this was part of a large coordinated SCRI grant, so a specialty crop grant across the US, big funded USDA. It was multiple states led out of Minnesota. It's called the Potato Soil Health Project, and there's just a lot of really great data. This was in conjunction with Miller Research over by Rupert. And then Mike Thornton was one of the Idaho PIs, as is Brenda Schroeder. Mike has since retired, hence my kind of tagging in on this project over the last few years. I'm only going to present on part of this data because we have a ton. So just to give some basics, it was essentially looking at the soil health metrics and also economic returns of a 3-year crop rotation and a 2-year crop rotation with potato. So can practices that I'll get into improve soil health in potato systems? Or can we create a more resilient system, something that's more resilient to disease, that you can still get good yields? And so there were 2 experiments. Experiment 1 is just a 3-year rotation. So it was potato, silage corn, and spring wheat back to potato. And then experiment 2 was a 2-year rotation. So spring wheat and potato alternated. It was started in 2019, and the project officially ended in 2022, although we have gotten some funding to continue this through actually this year, and hoping to have, another larger grant to continue it through 2028. So we would have 10 years of data. So the treatments were Burbank with no treatment. So nothing was done. And that's kind of the true control. It's Burbanks are not very resistant to disease without fumigation. And then Norcotas with no treatment, Norcotas with fumigation with Metam, Norcota with green manure. And that green manure is turnips, Austrian winter pea, and tillage radish. And that is grown during the season. So instead of the actual rotational crop, so instead of silage corn and spring wheat, that green manure is grown. And then Norcotas with compost, so dairy compost applied at about 10 tons an acre. And then Norcota with compost and green manure. So I just wanted to start off with the yield. This is a really, intense table. You can see all of the treatments listed here, but essentially there was no difference between anything. And the average was 370 weight per acre, which, that was for marketable yield, not just total yield. And compared to the 3-year rotation, again, there's a lot of data here, but I kind of wanted to show this, but here's just that rundown. Fumigation had the highest yield, and it was statistically higher. So when you fumigated the Norcotas, you ended up with 504 hundredweight per acre, followed by the Norcotas with any practice. So the green manure, the compost, or the green manure plus compost, you ended up with somewhere between almost 500 hundredweight per acre to 440 hundredweight per acre. And then, the no fumigation and the Burbanks were less than that. But for this, the average was 464 hundredweight per acre, which is pretty, that's quite a bit higher than the 2-year rotation. And that's what you're going to see as some of these results, is that you can't outrun a good rotation. So having a good rotation, that 3-year rotation, is the key to everything. And I'm going to continue to show the 2-year rotation data, but it's just a really bad idea. You can't outrun, pest and disease with enhanced practices. You really need to start off with that 3-year rotation. So what about economic returns? So this is kind of the key to this project, I think, was this economic analysis. So for the 2-year rotation, there was no difference. This is kind of the story of this 2-year rotation. And average returns, though, were $8,500 an acre. And this was just based on a theoretical fresh pack contract. The economists on the project did this analysis along with Jeff Miller from Miller Research. Again, for the 3-year rotation, it was really interesting. You'll remember that the fumigation had the Norcotas with fumigation had a higher yield than the practices. Well, for the economic analysis, there was no difference in your returns when you fumigated versus when you added compost. So this was compost and then compost plus green manure. But it's the compost that was the key there, not necessarily that green manure, because the green manure and this was also in a single year. So this was in the potato year when potatoes were grown in 2022 in both experiments. This is kind of the data that we're comparing. So it didn't look back on the returns previously of what, was given up for that green manure in those rotational years, but it wasn't the green manure that really mattered. It was the compost that mattered. And so by adding compost, you were able to reduce your disease and reduce your inputs, that MEDM that you applied, and the average returns were $14,000, almost $500 an acre. So a very significant difference between the 2-year and a 3-year rotation. So again, we should really be starting with 3-year rotations. The numbers back it up. So this is a lot. This is, it also, I didn't have enough time to create a higher quality image, but this is just a ton of data that we collected. So we've got yield and pH and nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then we have these soil health metrics. We did the Haney test, which is Solvita, carbon, organic carbon. We did aggregation, and then there's some disease, so scab and verticillium. I'm not going to go through this too terribly, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. So red is a positive. So if it's red, it means it's a positive correlation. So you'll see total yield is positively correlated to marketable yield, which is here. So here, and the darker the red, the higher the correlation. So you'll see that there's this red diagonal. It's a 1-to-1 because it's exactly where, marketable yield meets marketable yield. It should be a positive one. The darker the blue is negative. It's a negative correlation. And the darker the blue, the more negative correlation. So it's, the opposite effect. So you'll see for sodium, the higher the sodium, the lower the pH in this instance. And so for yield, just looking at total yield here, it was very correlated to total yield, obviously, and marketable yield. So that makes a lot of sense. Negatively correlated with pH. So the higher the pH, the lower the yield of the soil. But it was also positively correlated to organic matter and negatively correlated with calcium carbonate, which we know negatively correlated with active carbon. And that was interesting. We just are able to look at a lot of data to also see what factors are the most important, and what, in future projects can we kind of condense the amount of data that we're collecting. So this is Solvita, which is that Haney test. You can see it's actually positively correlated with a lot of other soil health tests. So it's positively correlated to organic matter and total carbon. It's also positively correlated to micro aggregates. So the little tiny aggregates that we see in soil. It's also positively correlated to potassium, but negatively correlated to pH and calcium carbonate, and also negatively correlated to scab, which is what I'm showing over here, but in a different location. So this is a disease that we face in potatoes. And so this one's really interesting because there's a lot of negative correlations. So we can say that when Solvita is high, scab incidence is lower. when organic matter is higher, scab incidence is lower. So the higher the carbon, theoretically, the more resilience you have to scab in this 3-year rotation. We didn't see much difference in these correlations in the 2-year rotation. So I'm not, and it's just also a lot of data. And so we're still mining through this. There's just a lot of, information. And so then I just wanted to show just one set of this data. So this is the Haney-Solvita burst. It's just how much carbon dioxide is released from the soil in a 24-hour period. You add some water, and it's kind of an indicator of how, it can be an indicator of how many microbes are there, the food source, and are they stressed or not stressed, kind of. There's a lot of different ways to interpret it. But essentially, it's higher CO2 emissions, higher CO2 flux, which means higher microbial activity, at least in the moment, in the 3-year rotations. It's also higher when you have the compost, which we've seen in other data sets and other data that I've collected in other cropping systems. And so that's all I had. And I think one of the key takeaways is that, good rotation, which we tend to have in Idaho, but to keep that in mind, having a longer rotation is better. And then if you can incorporate some compost, which is a carbon source, into your rotation, you can build some resilience to disease. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Linda, I have a quick question real quick. Did you say on the Norfolks with the green manure and the compost, those are also getting fumigated?
No, so only the Norcota fumigation are getting fumigated.
Okay.
So essentially what our data shows is that economically you can replace your fumigation with compost.
Okay,
and
cool.
Still get the same economic returns. Your yield itself will be lower, but the trade-off of the lower cost. And so that's the key of wanting to take this out more years, is to see, that 8-year mark. And then when we have the potatoes grown at the same time, 10-year mark, 9-year, I can't remember the math, when potatoes are grown at the same time again, to do that direct comparison to see, when you have longer term practices, is it more evident, or, is there more separation between these treatments?
Awesome. Thanks, Linda.
I've got a question for you, Linda. Wondering about the compost that was used for this, like where it was sourced and then how it was applied.
Yeah, so that's a good question. It was sourced from a dairy near Rupert, so Whiteside's Dairy. So it was production, from a production dairy facility. When they talk about compost, it probably, because it was created on that facility, it probably wasn't true compost. We kind of refer to it as agricultural compost. It's been dried down and it's gone through a couple of heating cycles, but maybe didn't get as broken down. It's probably still relatively high in the grand scheme of compost. It's probably relatively high in ammonium. It has some emissions that will come off of it, but it's still broken down compared to stockpiled manure. And for this, because it was plot work, it was weighed and kind of applied by hand, with a, kind of hand spread.
Gotcha. Okay. That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. Fortunately, the plots are not huge, but it is a decent amount of work.
I've actually got one more question for you,
Yeah.
Linda. So that, I guess graph you shared, that was pretty cool, showing the like positive and negative correlations. And so POC was negatively, or total yield was negatively correlated to POC.
Yeah.
Which I think you said you thought was interesting. Can you talk more about that?
I'm not really sure why. So it's right here. I'm not really sure why it was negatively correlated to POC. We saw the same thing in sugar beets, that not for yield, but for quality, that there's higher nitrates when there's high POC, there are higher nitrates in sugar beets, which decreases their quality. And it could be something similar that perhaps because we know that, well, we hypothesize that when there's higher epoxy, there's more mineralization that's going on. And so you could have too much nitrogen coming available compared to, you know, your control. So it could just have more, but in that instance, you'd expect it to be higher yield in potatoes. And so this is kind of set aside what I thought was happening for sugar beets and needing to do some investigation. There's just nothing in the literature about epoxy and non-corn. There's a lot of research on corn from the Midwest and soybeans, but not so much in our commodity crops here. So we've got a lot of data, but trying to figure out how to actually interpret it is really key.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Linda. Alrighty, Jemila, if you are ready to go, you are up next. Nice. That looks good, Jemila.
Can you see my screen now?
There we go. That looks good.
Yeah. So good morning again, everybody. I am Jemila Chellappa, Area Extension Educator, focusing on cropping system here at Southwest Idaho. It's been a year, more than 2 months with the University of Idaho Extension. I'm not going to share any specific data, but some story about or summary of all the past researches I've been doing and which drive or the major factor that is driving me towards the research and extension work I am doing now. So I'm more concerned about what happens to soil when we farm. So we all know that cultivating soils, that's really needed, but especially in intensively managed system, there are a number of changes that takes place and happens over time when we cultivate soil. So it decreases water infiltration and water holding capacity, and there's a decline in biological activity and diversity. And this eventually disrupts the nutrient cycling, and these can change soil less resilient and more dependent upon external inputs. We also see an increase in summer soil temperatures, like rise in erosion potential, and also a decline in aggregation of soils. And we also witnessed through different researches shared through Linda and Z, these are the common factors that affect cultivated soil. But still, we see a potential in productivity when we have our focus towards like maintaining the system with an external inputs, labor, fuel, nutrients, pesticides, and water. And here is where soil health principles come. And in my work, I really focus on no-till, cover crops, and reintegrating livestock. So these have the capacity to reverse many of these negative trends. So focusing on this and not to keep just in theory and put into practice in many of my researches I've done in past. I was born in Tuticorin, Tamil Nadu, India. It's like very far east, and now I'm homed here in Caldwell, Idaho, towards the west. And I've been working in different time zones of US with different cropping systems. And overall, I get a summary of maintaining soil health is a very base or foundation for sustainable agriculture. So to just summarize a little bit of work I did in India, my major focus was on management practices like relatively nutrient management and soil fertility in Indian agro ecosystems. I worked in different crops like rice, sugarcane, and pearl millet, 3 different soils like fluffy paddy soils I've worked, and like calcareous soils, like really problematic, and a drought tolerant crop like pearl millet, which is one of the alternative for the edible cropping system. So talking about phosphorus management in rice, we worked with an industry and tried different efficacy of fertilizers comparative with the main source of phosphatic fertilizers that growers use single superphosphate. And we found that different management practices influenced the usage of single superphosphate to 50% reduction. So combination of solubilizing bacteria, like single superphosphate solubilizing bacteria, we worked on like assessing the different species colonies on the uptake and growth pattern of rice. And this really proved positive about the nutrient availability and utilization. And nutrient management in sugarcane crops, like we had a combination of biologicals and compost and different raw sources managed from different farms. And the combined use of both biocompost and biofertilizers, they enhance the soil fertility and also the nutrient uptake of the crop. And some small studies on like phosphorus release patterns in rice, and also a major project on zinc biofortification in pearl millet, like getting different land races from different parts of India, and worked on the zinc use efficient potential of the pearl millet crop. And this gave a base for biofortification, and different soil health indicators were assessed. I'm not going to talk about that. And the major key implications of these researches like brought me a overall comprehensive thought about like using biofertilizers as an enhanced tool or enhanced methodology for solubilizing nutrients, like may it be phosphorus, nitrogen, or potassium, or any different micronutrients in concern. And combining the biocompost or the biofertilizers really have a good impact on nutrient use efficiency. And also the micronutrient study, especially zinc, and comparing with the different land races for efficacies, proved a base for biofortification of zinc in staple foods. And then my focus really changed, like building upon my earlier work. It shifted towards like conservation-based research management practices, and all the research focused, like I could summarize it as like identifying and understanding how all these conservation practices address soil health principles. So minimum disturbance or maximizing cover and integrating livestock, all these three major soil health principles played a major role in all my research focus. And different soil health indicators were analyzed, measured, and I had a very good thought of like scope on today's research on like regenerative agriculture, like how you say like no-till and conservation tillage, they improve soil structure, soil organic carbon, or like microbial life. And when I compared the conventional till and no-till practices with the natural ecosystem for the different soil health indicators, as Linda was speaking previously, like many properties had negative potential over negative correlation over the basic parameters. But still, the theory and practice was a little bit different. And comparing the integrated crop livestock system in different management practices over northern Great Plains, given basic knowledge about why integrating crops and livestock will have a sustainable future for agriculture. And I have to acknowledge all the three universities I worked with that gave me a good base or foundation for conservation-based research and management. And this slide just like gives or brings it all together about the different research or management practices I've been working with. So the no-till or conservation tillage system, when we compared it, really increased the aggregate stability of the soils, like when compared to the conventional or the natural system. And if you take the cover cropping and diversified rotations, like they boosted enzymatic activity and also carbon fractions in the soil. And some manure and fertility management trials, they gave an implication about reduced compaction and improved water retention in different agro ecosystems. And integrated crop livestock system, as I've already said, it showed me a way that increasing labile nutrients and also soil biological activity, this is one of the major management system we could aim for or adopt. And bioenergy cropping on marginal lands, like I was a part of the study, like a switchgrass, a biofumigant crop was introduced, and in different slopes, like foot slopes, I was compared with the other different slopes or landscapes in the Brookings, Beersford, and different regions of South Dakota, and the nitrogen application improved micro aggregates, and it also reduced the compaction. So this switchgrass and marginal land studies, they improve structure and aggregation, especially at foot slopes position. So bridging all these, the research and reality, now as an extension educator, I carry these research insights into fields and making it a very good foundation that I am really happy to work on soil health, as it is heart of everything. And whether we are adapting to drought or climate change or just trying to make some land work year after year, tackling some pest outbreaks like weed pressure or nematode infestation, this is what I work every day, like helping growers adapt and understand what are these conservation-based management practices. And I will be happy to hear and envision my work as, like, if someone says like I've shifted to no-till, added some little of crop rotation in my cropping system, and have incorporated different cover crops like legumes, brassicas, or grasses. And finally, I have some avenue to graze cattle through fall, winter, and early spring. So to hear all these will be my happy place. It's not just about yield. It's about building resilience and integrated system for the next generation. So that's all I have. And it's not dirt, it's soil is what I advocate wherever I go.
Thank you, Jemila. We can take questions for Jemila. Jemila, I'm curious. I know that you are relatively new to your role. I'm wondering what you're looking forward to working on, or what projects you're looking forward to working on in the Treasure Valley.
Yeah. So I am planning to work mainly on integrated crop livestock system. So for now, I'm like collecting the preliminary data of what is really needed about integrating crop and livestock in our ecosystem, because in Midwest and the Southeastern US, like the cropping system is entirely different, and there is like a lot more avenues for seasons to rotate, or like to include livestock as an entity together with the cropping system. But here, everybody see that as a separate entity. So what is just like bringing them away, or like what are the real characteristics that is like hindering them from adopting that as an integrated system? So that is what I'm aiming for, and focusing on some sustainable agricultural practices, like going in for integrated pest management or conservation tillage practices. Next.
Awesome. Thanks, Jemila. Any other questions for Jemila? Okay, well, we look forward to seeing what research and projects you work on in the future. Thanks for sharing, Jemila.
Thank you, Courtney.
Alrighty, Kendall, our last but not least presenter, if you're ready to go, we're all ready for you.
Great.
Looks great.
All right. Excuse me. My name is Kendall Kahl, and I recently started in a new organic and sustainable agriculture extension specialist position that's based out of Sandpoint, Idaho, as of February. But today I'm going to talk about some work that I did in the Moscow area while working for the University of Idaho in our Palouse dryland wheat production systems up here. And this is some of the type of work that I hope to continue, maybe with a little bit more of an organic focus moving forward. we integrate cover crops primarily often because of the potential soil health benefits, but also trying to get a lot of other services from them. So today I'm going to be focusing on sort of how we think about integrating cover crops for the nitrogen benefit that we could get. Sorry. So I'm going to start by just walking us through a theoretical example of what we expect to. Sorry, I'm going to walk us through a theoretical example of what we expect to get from our cover crops in terms of the nitrogen benefit and how we think about our nitrogen management strategy in general, using winter wheat as an example. So we've got our plant available nitrogen on the vertical axis here.
Hey, Kendall.
And, yep.
It hasn't switched from your intro screen yet.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Let me see.
There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So where was I? So I guess now that you can see it here, my theoretical diagram is going to walk us through how we think about nitrogen management and how nitrogen flows through our system. So we've got our plant available nitrogen on the vertical axis and a crop year across the horizontal axis here. And this green line is just sort of a rough depiction of what we would expect from crop demand, with sort of our peak crop demand during spring and summer months. So then in a winter wheat system, we're gonna fertilize and seed right in the fall. And this brown line is showing our soil nitrogen supply. We're hoping that nitrogen stays in our soil over the winter months. It'll start to decrease in the spring as the crop starts taking it up. And then we may fertilize again in the spring just to make sure that nitrogen supply stays above our crop demand. And then repeat again potentially in the fall if we're coming on within a second fall crop. And we fertilize because without it, we are concerned that our nitrogen supply would not quite meet that peak crop nitrogen demand. But what's interesting to think about is in a non-fertilized system or just a low nitrogen system, we'll still see this sort of peak in nitrogen supply that mirrors our crop demand. And that's because as the soil warms and is wet in the spring, microbes are going to be turning over that organic nitrogen in our soil, releasing it in plant available forms, and should supply some additional nitrogen that mirrors when our crops would potentially be needing that higher supply. So what we're trying to do with cover crops is essentially shift that yellow line up so that we do meet that peak crop demand. And we're doing this by increasing the amount of organic nitrogen inputs through our cover crop residue, and hopefully working to increase and speed up the nitrogen cycling within our system. So I'm going to just show some very simple data from one of the studies we did up here in the Palouse, looking at integrating cover crops as a replacement for summer fallow. And this is in our no-till system. So we're not actively incorporating that plant material into the soil. And what you get out of your cover crop is largely going to depend on the type of species you include in the mix, but also to a large extent, the climate and the way you manage it, whether it's irrigated or not, and whether it's tilled, et cetera. But comparing it to the fallow just gives us a good comparison of the cover crop versus no crop growing. And in this study, we were in a relatively dry area, 12 to 18-inch precipitation, non-irrigated, no-till. And the spring cover crop that we used was an oat, barley, sunflower, pea, and turnip mix. And what we came in and did was measure, the amount of nitrogen that we can that we see building up in our cover crop residue. We can measure what we've got in the soil, and trying to move forward and thinking about how this organic material can supply nitrogen in the future. And in this particular study, we terminated our cover crops with an herbicide in early July. And at that point, in most years, it had produced between 1 to 2 tons per acre total biomass. And then we came in and measured the amount of nitrogen within that biomass, as well as how much nitrogen was available in the soil after harvest and at the end of the summer season, and then could compare the soil nitrogen following the cover crop to what we saw following summer fallow. And in 2019 and 2020, which were sort of normal sort of level precipitation, we saw around 58 to 75 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Nitrogen stored in our cover crop residue. And then what's interesting to think about is how that relates to what we saw in the soil, particularly in the top foot. And in those same 2 years, 2019 and 2020, we saw around 30 to 38 pounds per acre less nitrogen following the cover crop compared to fallow. So this is, I think, a good demonstration of what the cover crops are doing what we want them to take up some of that available nitrogen, bringing in more nitrogen to the system through nitrogen fixation to some extent, and storing that in a form that is more stable in that plant material that can then become part of the nutrient supply in future years. I was just going to point out also 2021 was a pretty extreme drought year, if you all might remember, and so there just wasn't as much biomass production or nitrogen moving through that system. And then another important thing to think about with these cover crops is that in this study in particular, we didn't measure directly the amount of nitrogen input from the cover crops below ground through roots or that legume nitrogen fixation. But so the total input from the cover crop would be higher than even what we were directly measuring. And then moving forward, the questions as far as, what is the true nitrogen benefit is we have to start thinking about really when this organic nitrogen will become available to our future cash crops. When it's not tilled in particular, that can take a little bit longer. So maybe not supplying nitrogen to our immediately subsequent crop. And then the question becomes, is it 3 years out? Is it 2 years out? And do you just need multiple cycles through with our cover crop in your rotation before you've built up enough of that organic nitrogen supply to really see a benefit and be able to reduce your fertilizer rates more confidently? And then the other thing we're looking into and thinking more about is where to put the cover crops in rotation so that they have the most benefit to our cash crops, and particularly our high nitrogen demanding cash crops. And I think with that, I could take any questions.
Thank you, Kendall. It'd be interesting to try it with another cover crop, say, like a legume or more of one that's a little bit less carbon heavy, like winter wheat. See how that looked as well.
Yeah, and since this study, we have we've had a follow-up project where we were looking more at different mixes and how that affects some of the nitrogen benefit in particular. So continuing to explore that.
Future projects. Go ahead, Kathy.
I just was down at Rupert in a soils workshop that the University of Idaho gave, and the presenters down there talked about how all kinds of fumigation, chemical fertilizer and chemical herbicides deplete the soil organisms, microorganisms. And I'm just wondering if there's been any studies that where you don't use any of those products, and what the impact has been on both the soil nitrogen levels and also the crop yields.
That's a great question. And it's a bit of a complicated answer. We have done some work looking at comparing organically managed crops to conventionally managed crops. We haven't looked in depth at the microbial community, but some of that research shows smaller sort of soil biological communities in the conventionally managed systems. So with synthetic herbicides and pesticides. And there is some research that shows that that using some of those products does decrease your soil biological activity. But often yields are a little bit reduced because either the overall plant available nutrients are often lower, and just with additional pest pressure. So so there are some trade-offs, and it's a little hard to say across the board because all production systems work so differently. I'm not sure if that answers your question or if I missed a part of it.
Well, I'm just so you haven't really tested the crop productivity at without using any of those chemicals?
No, sorry, we have. And in direct comparisons, often the organic systems are a little bit lower yielding, but somewhat similar to what Linda was showing with her potato study with some of the different management practices. The organic systems without the synthetic inputs may have lower, slightly lower yields, but higher profits. So it's just a different system in general. And I think where we lack some of the data is in long-term management. And if there are additional gains you might get in a system that's managed organically over the long term, as you sort of build up that soil health with these different practices, where you might see less of a yield decline compared to a conventionally managed system with synthetic inputs, sort of like what you're describing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's something certainly I hope to explore more in this new position. So.
Okay, we have a big question in the chat from Barry. This is a fertility question. Maybe everybody can tackle this one. For Barry, I'll read it out. In a cool season grass pasture, no legumes, a soil test results, organic matters 4.3, cation exchange is 21, organic nitrogen, I'm assuming is 120, ammonium is 10, nitrate is 5. How would you interpret this in terms of biological and nutrient cycles when productivity is very good and lush green? Forage has very low plant diversity and will be overseeded with alfalfa, clover, forbs, and additional grasses this season. Should we be testing for molybdenum since it's required to make nitrogenase enzyme to allow legumes to utilize N3? You haven't met Barry yet, Kendall. He asks big questions in the chat.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, where is this? Where is this field, I suppose?
Southern Idaho.
I would guess, and I'm a little bit less familiar with the Southern Idaho soil, so maybe some of the other folks can chime in, but that seems like a pretty decent organic matter content. And those nitrogen, I'm assuming those nitrogen numbers are parts per million. That's the case. I mean, it seems like you're saying, this is a very, it seems like a pretty fertile, lush, fertile soil, and it sounds like it's a productive crop. It's hard to say what it's hard to say what we would expect to see in terms of biological community, but if it's if it's a perennial pasture that isn't being disturbed frequently based on these results and just that fact, I would assume there's a pretty good soil biological community. And as far as using molybdenum specifically, I haven't explored that specifically in terms of how that might affect the legume nitrogen fixation, but in theory, that could be an interesting thing to look at, or an interesting thing to explore, to see if that does actually have an impact on increasing the nitrogen that you get from your legumes. So great question, and I'll write it down to maybe see if we could explore something like that later.
Jemila, you just sent me a chat. Do you want to just say what you're thinking out loud?
Yeah. Yeah, what Kendall said was correct. But one more thing I would suggest is maybe go for light grazing and try to open up the canopy like before seeding, like very minimum disturbance. Like I don't know what kind of tillage equipment you use, like very minimum disturbance, and to make sure that your seeds are placed correctly and your plan, you said like you wanted to again seed alfalfa, forbs, and what more, like yeah, clover. That's a good suggestion, like, but already your soil is good with organic matter and nitrogen content, and your biology is good, but still like you mustn't like make it over dominant with nitrogen, since like all these crops will supply nitrogen to the soil. So better like going for starter fertilizer that has like phosphorus and potassium in a balanced way rather than like giving more nitrogen. That would be some of my recommendation. Yeah, because like all the dominant crops you have chose like gives like lot more nitrogen, and your soil is like with good organic matter, and it must have some space for mineralizing that nitrogen. Yeah. Yeah. Avoid grazing like a lot. That's what I think.
Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, one thing I was just going to add is what Jemila said too about you might need to set that grass back a little bit if you're going to try and interseed something, because we at NRCS have tried lots of times. I've seen a lot of attempts at interseeding into an established grass, and most of them fail because they just can't compete with the established grasses. So you've got to somehow set it back. And I've seen some success where people, I think Utah State did some trials where they actually sprayed out little strips and planted right into them using like Roundup or something just to kill strips so that they could seed in to eliminate some of that, or, cut back the competition a little to allow that to get started. Those legumes are going to start fairly slow. So if you got a fairly competitive grass, they don't have a chance. We often like to start it out with that mix if we're going to try and put a mix of grass and forbs.
This is awesome. This is what you get when you have a bunch of NRCS professionals and U of I extension on here. You get some personalized help. Hopefully this is helpful for you, Barry.
Yeah, Courtney, I'll throw in a little bit.
Yes, please.
Start with, for Southern Idaho, those are incredible organic matters. We don't even see gardens that have that high organic matter. So, you know, I can't answer exactly on the biological cycling, but I got to believe with that high organic matter that, you know, the biological activity in Barry's pasture is a lot higher than, certainly higher than our conventionally tilled fields that are 1.5% organic matter, maybe. That's a really interesting question on molybdenum. And in everything you read about seeding legumes, you never see that. Basically say make sure that they're inoculated, and that'll take care of the nitrogen problem. And so that's an interesting question. I would chime in with what Travis said. My experience in trying to interseed, not necessarily into grass, but you know, interseed cover crop mixes, is that those legumes just struggle in, even when they're planted at the same time in a cover crop mix. And when I was in Valley County, we did some interseeding with alfalfa into some existing pasture. And the only way that it really worked was to spray out the pasture and let the alfalfa come. And so that will be a challenge to try and get that established in that established sod without setting that grass back somehow.
Awesome. Thanks for all the help, everyone. Thanks for the suggestions. And I know Barry would be chiming in right now, but his microphone doesn't work, so that's why he's not talking right now. Okay, was there any other, we wrapped up our presentations. Are there any other comments or questions for any of our speakers before we sign off today? Alrighty, hearing none, we are wrapping up our 5 for 5 for this season. We'll start, keep an eye on your emails. We'll start sending out some emails for field days. I know Steve has got some things planned. I'm sure Linda and I will work on some things, and Jemila as well. So keep an eye out on your email for some invites to some field days this summer. And thank you so much for coming to our 5 for 5s this season, and we'll begin this series again next December. Look out for the recorded version on YouTube later as well. Thanks so much to all of our speakers and everybody for coming. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Courtney.